Welcome to part 10 of this video series that describes making a steam test plant. This video covers making the baseboard for the plant. Components made in previous videos in this series will mount on the baseboard when it's completed. This series of photos show the various components of the steam plant. I laid the components out on the bench so that I could measure the required dimensions for the baseboard. First, there's the feed water tank that stores boiler feed water. Making the tank was covered in part 8 of this video series. Next, there's the feed water pump that pumps water from the feed water tank into the boiler. Making the mounting for the feed water pump was covered in part 7 of this video series. The boiler is mounted in the center of the plant. The boiler generates steam that will be used to run various model steam engines I have in my collection. To fire the boiler, I made a burner arrangement that runs on propane gas. You can just see the burner tips through the firebox door. Making the burner arrangement was covered in part 3 of this video series. Fuel for the burners is supplied from a 1-pound propane tank. The tank slides into a base and has a cover on it. I 3D printed the base and cover off camera during the project. Steam from the boiler is piped to a steam turret which splits it into 2 paths so that I can run 2 steam engines at once. Making the steam turret was covered in part 4 of this video series. Exhausts from the steam engines are returned to the steam turret and are then piped to the condenser oil trap which separates water from the steam. Water and oil will be drained from the tank periodically and remaining exhaust steam will be piped to the boiler chimney. With all the components set on the bench, I measured the baseboard dimensions will need to be 21 inches wide by 17 inches deep. To make the baseboard, I cut a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, 21 inches wide by 17 inches deep on my table saw. This photo shows the baseboard on the bench. I marked 2 1/8 inch by 1 inch mahogany strips roughly to length. The mahogany strips I use come from Northeastern Scale Lumber. They have a range of very good products that I use often. I'll put a link to their website in the description below. I then cut the mahogany strips to length on the bandsaw. Next, I glued one of the mahogany strips onto one end of the baseboard. I use medium viscosity CA glue, also known as superglue, on my baseboards. CA glue has an advantage as it grabs quickly and dries hard. Other glues tend to be softer, which makes it difficult to sand them later. After the glue grabbed the mahogany strip, I used clamps to secure the strip in place. I repeated this process for attaching a mahogany strip at the other end of the baseboard and clamped the strip in place once again. I usually let the glue dry for around 30 minutes before proceeding. After the glue had set, I began the process of cleaning up the mahogany strips. The first step is to trim down the length of the strips on the bandsaw. I take care not to cut too close to the plywood while sawing off the ends. I then trim the edges of the strips with a handwood plane. I found power planes to be too aggressive for planing the strips, so I gradually shaved the strips down with the hand plane. After planing, I used a mouse sander to sand the mahogany strips flush with the plywood base. The overall process took a little time, but I was happy with the results. I repeated the process for the other 2 sides of the baseboard. The photo shows the 2 sides clamped while the glue dried. This clip shows me arranging the mahogany strips on the top of the baseboard to develop a strategy for gluing them on. I found that starting from one edge of the baseboard would leave only a small area for the last strip. This would create difficulty gluing and trimming it later. I marked lines in the center of the base and then 1/2 inch on either side so that I could test starting points for laying the strips from the center of the baseboard. Using the line on the right side of the center line as a starting point, I was able to get sufficient space at the edge of the baseboard to glue the last strip on. It's worth taking the time to plan how to glue the mahogany strips onto the baseboard. This will avoid issues later. This speeded up clip shows the process for gluing the strips onto the baseboard. First, I spread glue onto the baseboard to form an inch-wide gluing area. Then I place the strip on the board and align it. Next, I use clamps to clamp the strip to the baseboard while the glue dries. I wipe off any excess glue from the strips and then repeat until one half of the baseboard is covered in mahogany strips. I repeated the process on the other half of the baseboard. This clip shows the last mahogany strip being clamped in position. I left the baseboard for an hour for the glue to dry before moving on to the next step. After the glue had dried, I removed the clamps and took the baseboard over to the bandsaw. I trimmed the excess mahogany strip off the baseboard, taking care not to go too close to the edging strips. Next, I used the 4-inch belt sander to rough sand the edges of the baseboard. I finished the sanding with a mouse sander to give the baseboard its final bare finish. Here's a photo of the baseboard on the bench. So far I'm happy with the board. With baseboards, I'm looking for a perfectly imperfect look to them, as this replicates what wood planking would have looked like on full-sized plants back in the day. I set the baseboard in the spray booth and gave it a coat of stain. I'm using a walnut stain here, which is a go-to for baseboards. I wipe the stain onto the board with a lint-free cloth to get an even coating. After the first coat had dried, I put another coat of stain on, followed by wipe on polyurethane varnish. I did this off camera, so I'll end this video here. You'll see the finished baseboard in the next video as I start to build the steam plant. So, that's the baseboard for the steam plant completed. I'd like to give a big shout out to Keith Appleton, as I used many of his techniques while making the baseboard in this video. I'll put a link to Keith's YouTube channel in the description below. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to support my channel. Thank you.